Welcome, everybody. I am really excited about tonight. As many of you know, I go to many whiskey tastings, and one of the reasons I love going to the big events, and even some of the smaller tastings, is that frequently you get to meet people from distilleries that you have wanted to meet. And there are so many distilleries that we want to get onto our talks that every once in a while I just forget about somebody or they fall off the list. I met Thomas Mooney at a Binny's craft event back in the fall, and I was like, Westward, we definitely want to get Westward on, and we talked about it, and that's why we're here. We have two people from Westward with us tonight. A few housekeeping things before we get started. First, we are probably going to be going probably going to be going a little longer than usual, maybe 75 minutes tonight, because we have been the beneficiaries of 6 expressions tonight that Jared and Thomas gave us. Wonderful, incredible generosity from you guys. So thank you so much. And I will tell you that there are some people who aren't on tonight. What they usually do is that they have our samples and then they rewatch, and then they'll actually watch the YouTube while they enjoy them. So they will also get the benefit of what we're learning tonight from you. So that's the first thing, is that we're going a little long. Second, since we do have 6 samples, that is 6 ounces of whiskey. Please do not finish everything tonight. Okay, I just pace yourselves. No reason to drink it all tonight. Let's enjoy it. You can enjoy it all later. I'd like to introduce now Jared Craven. Jared, you are the market manager for, what's the name of your company again? Is it Redwood Brands?
Redwood Brands, that's
Redwood
correct.
Brands.
Yeah,
Okay, so you're the Illinois guy, right?
that's me. I am the Illinois guy. So my background is I've kind of lived all over. I'm from South Florida. I lived in New York. I've actually lived in Portland, Oregon as well, LA, and I moved to Chicago in June. And so I've been in the food and beverage industry since 1995, so quite a while. I was a bartender for over 20 years, and I only stopped when COVID hit, and my knees and ankles are much more grateful for it. So not having to deal with all those long shifts behind the bar. Um, I am heavily involved with USBG, which is, if y'all don't know, United States Bartenders Guild. I'm actually on the national board of directors for the Society of Wine Educators. Dunbar 5-day executive bourbon steward certifications in sherry and tequila. I love booze is basically what I'm getting at. I love the
You're in good company
education
here.
aspect.
Yeah, you're in
Like,
good company here. Yes.
but my role now is I work for Redwood Brands, so we deal with I work with about 4 brands right now. I say about because they kind of shuffle in and out, um, and I focus primarily in Chicago, but all around Illinois, working with a few different brands. But we're here today, obviously, to talk about Westward. So I would be your local point of contact.
Okay,
I
great.
live in Avondale. I actually live just a few blocks from Eric. So
Right. So it was easy for you to get all the samples to Eric. You didn't have to ship them. You just dropped them off at his place, which is great.
yeah, I
And by the way, everybody, I want you all to realize that there's a lot of work in the background, that gets us to this point. So after I met, Thomas and we chatted, he put me in touch, he put Eric and me in touch with Jared, because so Jared helped with a lot of the logistics, helping this actually happen because, most of these companies, especially the successful ones that have a lot of distribution, they have a lot of people working for them. And, you have to go, especially with regulations, you have to go with somebody who's on the ground. So that somebody like Jared is very important to this process. So Jared, thank you for helping with everything here.
of
And
course.
um, so we also have with us, really our special guest tonight is Thomas Mooney. Okay, Thomas is the founder and CEO of Westward. Now, by the way, many people say, there's Westland, from Seattle, and there's Westward. And many people frequently make that mistake. They confuse them. I actually did that before the Zoom even started, so I apologize. But Thomas, please say hello and tell us where you're calling in from today.
Yeah, hi, greetings from the West Coast. I am founder and CEO of Westward Whiskey, and I'm really happy to be here with you today because what we do is a lot of fun, but it's also often really hard. And so this marks the end of the hard part of the day and the beginning of why I love doing what I do, which is that we get to share something we were excited about with old friends and make some new friends, and talk about whiskey. I have been, involved with Westward since the brand began, so back over a decade. Our distillery is actually turning 20 years old this year, which may not seem old, but in the history of American craft distilling, we were one of the original craft distillers in the U.S., starting out in Oregon. We co-founded and were the first president of the American Craft Spirits Association. We co-founded and are on the board of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. And so we've had, I was going to say a front row seat, but we're not really in the front row, we're in the ring. We've just really had the privilege of being involved with not just turning Westward into what it is and setting it up for what it can be, but really helping to transform our industry, which has been a lot of fun, and it's gone way better than we probably thought we would do when we started.
Well, that's wonderful. By the way, you said a word there that I like, but before I talk about that word, everybody, you can start drinking. You can start sampling the first sample. We'll be talking about the whiskeys in a minute, but there's no reason to wait.
I'll model that behavior by pouring myself.
Very good. And I'm starting off with the first one, the American, you're the which we call the original on our list, but on your label it is Westward American Single Malt. Okay, that is just straightforward Westward American Single Malt. You use the word craft. Okay, and we've actually interviewed Margie Lerman here, the president, of the association. Paul Letgo, whom of course, is local here. We've had him on a few times, talking with him about the standards for American single malt and how that works. So yes, you've been around for a long time. We know that you've been involved in all this stuff. And Brett Pantani was the person who actually introduced me to your whiskeys because of a craft whiskey table that I host every year with a few people at a fundraiser for a local homeless shelter that we support. And it's a craft whiskey table. And early on, you were one of the first whiskeys that Brett had me put at that table, because he curates that table with me every year. So that's how I know about your stuff, and now I've known about it for many, many years. I'm going to ask you a few questions here before we really get into the details about each individual expression. So we have 6 expressions here tonight. Okay, are they all using the same grain? Are they all using the same barley?
Yes. So actually, that one thing I was going to say is, for all of us who love going to whiskey tastings and talking about whiskey, there are, I think, at least 2 topics that tend to dominate the conversation in most of the tastings we go to that probably won't hear. One of them is grain, and one of them is age, but we'll get to that in a minute. But yes, and the reason we won't talk a whole lot about grain is that it is so important to us that, we committed to making whiskey from 100% malted barley. And so everything we're trying here is 100% malted barley. There are some rare exceptions where we've used grain bills that have a little bit of malted rye or wheat, still malted, but by and large, and for what we're tasting today, one of the defining characteristics of Westward is the use of 100% malted barley grown in the American Northwest. So that,
so it's local.
Somebody's wondering
so it is local barley. It is essentially local barley to your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I mean, and when we say local, because I thought you were going to call me out on saying the word craft and launching a religious debate by using the word, but
no, I'm good. I'm good with it. It's good.
Since you gave me a pass on that, I don't want to now start the local religious war. But I mean, just for clarity, right? The American Northwest grows almost all of the malting barley in North America. Idaho is actually by far the biggest producer. So when we looked around us at what would be the definitive, whiskey of the American Northwest, barley was the obvious choice because that's what we do better than anyone. And so that's the route we took.
Got it. And is it all coming from like the same producer? Is all the barley coming from one large producer? Because you produce a lot of stuff. You need a lot of barley.
So yeah, our malt is grown by probably thousands of farms, but malted almost entirely in one place, which
Okay.
is called Great Western Malting in Vancouver, Washington, which is just across the Columbia River from us. So I mean that is about as local as it gets.
Yeah.
It's a 5 to 10 minute drive from the distillery to the malting.
So in addition to, talking about the barley, of course, we need to talk about the barrels. And obviously these are very different barrels of the six expressions that we have here, but we're starting off with, Westward American single malt whiskey. It's 45% ABV. Can you tell us about the barrels in which this was aged? And by the way, it's freaking delicious. Starting off with this, I mean, let's face it, we could just drink this if we wanted to, and we'd have a great night. But I mean, this is wonderful stuff. But tell us about the barrels that were used for your original, for your American single malt.
Yeah, of course. And in classic Thomas fashion, I'll take your simple question and turn it into a 5 minute answer. But
That's fine. That's
you
perfectly
did
fine.
more than everybody. This is going to take a while, and we all now have whiskey in our glass, so it's okay. Uh, so I think the way to think about Westward is that we brought together three traditions that we love and that are very well established, but that historically had never come together as one to create something. And so that is, if I describe Westward, the product, and this is really the essence of what we're tasting first, our original, is we brew a classic American pale ale. We pot distill in the Scottish single malt tradition, but then we mature that whiskey in the bourbon tradition in new American oak. So to directly answer your question, we age our whiskey, we age our original, which we're tasting right now, in new American oak. We have worked with several different cooperages over the years. Our main partner today is Independent Stave, but what we're tasting would have a blend of whiskeys from actually mostly different cooperages, not Independent Stave. So Kelvin, McGinnis, and others. And so I'd say what puts the Westward in our choice of barrels is the use of kind of lower char. We do so much to put great flavor into the spirit that goes into the barrel, that we know that the barrel will add a lot of character. We don't want to turn it into something totally different. We don't want to lose those really bright flavors from that American pale ale. We don't want to lose the kind of robust flavorfulness of a double pot distilled whiskey. And so we use 2 to 3 char barrels that, again, give Westward a lot of character, but still allow that
Right.
original
And as you
flavor.
said, these are new barrels. Nothing has been in these barrels before on this particular expression.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
as we taste through the different samples, we'll talk about some secondary aging, and then one kind of immensely complicated Solera project that is actually the
I
second thing.
read about that, and that was fascinating. And I know that some people here are going to really geek out about it. But now I have to ask you the question now that you said, you don't necessarily put on your on your bottles. So how long has this been in those barrels?
Yeah. And by the way, I'm just going to parentheses to answer a question. Oh, sorry. If somebody else is answering the questions in the chat, then that's great. But yes, the order is we're starting with original, and then we're going to go to milestone after that.
Oh, by the way, somebody said hello to you in the chat. Marie Chow.
Oh, Marie,
Yeah.
you really came. Thank you.
Yeah, so she's on here, and she said, unfortunately, that she doesn't have any Westward with her right now, unfortunately. But she says hello, and so I wanted to
Yeah, well,
recognize her because I didn't know if you were reading the chat while we were going on
she
here.
knows where I live and who our mutual friends are, so she'll get whiskey.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
So
no,
aging,
anyway,
aging.
so what the original we're enjoying right now is a blend of a small number, like call it 15 to 20 barrels, that would range from 5 to 7 years old.
Oh,
And
okay.
so we, we have a very strong and sometimes argumentative stance around like putting ages on labels. And we certainly have nothing against anybody else doing it. I think we have two different kind of beliefs that come together. One, that we want to retain, so the blending, which is the last act of creating Westward before it goes into a barrel, really benefits from the fact that whiskey develops its own, every barrel develops its own character over time, right? And so
True, true.
we have a target for what we want our original single malt to taste like. And the way to achieve that, kind of paradoxically, is not by just doing the same thing and bottling that, but by recognizing that as Westward matures, it acquires one of several different characters,
Sure.
and we need to blend those into something more complex, more interesting, and also more consistent over
Right. I
time.
mean, single malt does not mean single barrel. You know, it's.
Right.
I remember I learned this first back in the late '90s. I was at a Macallan tasting at Binny's, and that's before people knew a lot about single malts, and we were all learning still about it. This is going back over 20 years now, and I remember the master distiller saying that over 50 barrels goes into Macallan 12. And that they're trying to get that consistency each year,
Mhm.
because for you to sell, there's something about educating the marketplace, and having that consistency also matters to the retailers, that they know what's there. So you said about how many barrels go into the original?
Yeah, typically a Westward mingle will be 15 to 20 barrels,
Okay, well,
and
that's a good number. That's a good
sometimes a
number.
little more, sometimes a little less, but that's generally what we feel we need to
Okay.
bring together to do this. And I mean, I'll say, because there's a lot of there are a lot of beliefs in whiskey that just aren't really so. But one that surprisingly is really true is just how every barrel develops a character of its own. And so
Right.
on any given day, we will fill, like say, at the time we were distilling what we're tasting right now, we would fill 5 barrels in a day. And, that was a day's work. And those barrels, the spirit came from the same still run, so it's literally the same thing going into the barrels. The barrels came from the same cooperage at the same time from the same lot, and we'll taste them 4 years later. They're different,
Yeah, they're
and
different.
it's
Yeah.
not it's not about our barrel warehouse because it's not big enough for it to be that. It
Right.
is really the character of the wood and how every barrel is unique, and
Right.
and
But at the same time, you do produce single barrels, and
we do.
we are fortunate. Those of us in Chicago are fortunate. I showed you before that I happen to have with me a Westward single barrel selected by Binny's. Okay, and so it's also nice to be able to get that onto our shelves as well.
Mhm.
So obviously you do single barrels as well. So, the next expression, we're going to keep talking about the whiskey, of course, and the distillery, as everybody starts to taste Milestone, and I'll ask you about the Milestone in a minute. But can you also tell us about like the water source that you use? Are you filtering the water? Is there limestone? What's the characteristics of the water that you're using in your distillation processes?
Yeah, I mean the origin of water in the Northwest or on of our side of the Cascades is snow melt from the Cascades. So it's water that begins in kind of a very pristine state in a very beautiful place. We we so the water we use to brew, we want minerals in, and so we don't deionize it or demineralize it. This is kind of natural water that has all of those minerals in it. And then downstream, when we're finally bottling and we're cutting whiskey to the proof that we're going to bottle it at, we do use deionized water because at that point we've got the flavor we want. We don't want to cause anything to precipitate out of solution. We're done, and we're really just adjusting to, the target ABV and, what the label says and what we think is the optimal way to enjoy it. So minerals in the brewing water are deionized in the bottling water.
Got it. Wonderful. So the geeks here are going to really, and by the way, that would probably describe more than half of us, if not all of us. Okay. Milestone. Crazy Solera process. Thomas is going to tell us about this, but I will tell everybody that there's also a pretty detailed description on the Westward website about it. So I already started to enjoy the Milestone just now, and the texture to this whiskey, the legs on the glass. I mean, there's really something going on here. Can you tell us about the process that resulted in this expression?
Yeah, absolutely. And so in a way, we're in these first two rounds, we're covering the bookends chronologically, because original is the story of us and what led us into making whiskey and what we felt we could add to the future of whiskey. And Milestone is our most recent, kind of, I think, grandest opus. And so but the reason we're tasting it now is, I guess, in one sense, it gives everybody a sense of where we began and some of what we're capable of now. There's also a more practical reason, which is if we did everything chronologically, then we would be tasting 86 proof Milestone after 125 proof cask strength, and none of us would actually leave knowing what it tasted like.
Right.
So
There's a reason why we have cask strength last on the list, obviously.
Yeah, so there was a practical necessity, but I'm turning it into a story of intentionality. So Milestone is, what we set out to do here is something that captured the history of us, right? Going back 20 years to when we began, and just milestones, if you will, along the way of things we've tried that, much to our surprise, worked and kept us going. And so the product is a Solera of 21 different casks, all from different points in our history, all reflecting different barrel finishes that we've done. It's slightly skewed toward wine finishes, and some really interesting ones. So
So
Sauterne.
21. This is 21 different casks went into this.
Yeah. So we
Wow.
we took whiskey from 21 different casks,
You're
and
getting thumbs up from people. You're getting thumbs up. People are like gesticulating, like wow on the screen. So
I agree, but I'm not objective. So so it's, everything from Sauterne to Pinot to Tempranillo to Chardonnay cask finishes to, some stout, some different versions or manifestations of our original, but each one intentionally put in the Solera so that each one would contribute something from a flavor profile, but also from the story of us, right? And things we've done along the way.
is
And
this your
then
first year? Is
we
this the first year that you're doing Milestone?
we've released it once, so
Okay.
it's a in and out limited release that came out last year, and then the next release will be in September of this year, and counter to what is happening in our industry, where the higher the proof, the more excited everybody gets. We chose to go the other direction and make this the lowest ABV product we've ever bottled. And we did it for reasons that I'm sure are obvious to everybody here, that there is so much subtlety and so much complexity in the flavor of, bringing together 21 different casks, that the higher the proof goes, the less, we're able to perceive that. And so we'd be losing.
So you tested out different versions of it with different proofs?
We did, but we knew from the start that we wanted to start from the bottom up, not from the top down. So it
For a
wasn't
low proof single malt, this has a very complex flavor. Really, it's well done. This
Yeah,
really is
I mean,
amazing.
and I would argue the complexity comes from the lower ABV because there's so much complexity in the flavor of the whiskeys we're blending. So it doesn't need to come from, from the greater concentration of flavor. It's the variety of flavors that come together.
And the youngest cask that's in here and the oldest cask, what are those?
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna give you the wrong numbers, so I'm not gonna give you a number, but it's, I mean, some of the oldest that we have, so over a decade, and I mean, nothing younger than 4 years, so
Okay.
somewhere in between that. And I realize that's a very broad range,
No, that's
but we
fine. Nothing
were
wrong with that.
we were solving more for those milestones of innovation and those varied contributions of character and flavor.
Got it. So when we talk about Westward and your core range, okay, is your goal for Milestone to be part of your core range going forward?
No, I think I'll be the first to admit, like when we talk about core range, I think we're talking to ourselves because in our imaginary awesome world, like every store or restaurant or bar that I walk into, there are going to be 4 bottles of Westward on the shelf or behind the bar. And they'll be original Pinot Noir cask, stout cask, and cask strength. So
Okay. So de facto, they become your core range.
yeah, so that's what we aim to have available as much as possible in as many places as possible. And in part it's because we think each one of those tells a different and important part of the story of Westward and of what we contribute to the conversation around whiskey. So we love, just our default would be to always want to start with tasting those 4 because together I think they really represent who we are. But then, we love to try things, and so that's where something like Milestone comes along, or that's
Or
something.
the Pinot Noir
Okay.
or the Pinot, which is the next one on our list here. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, so each one of those has
Yeah.
its own story of how it came to be, but yes, to answer your core range would be more like us talking to ourselves, but nobody really listens to us, which is okay. And
Well, as
so,
long as they buy your stuff, I guess you don't really care.
but I guess, yeah, if somebody said, gee, I love Westward, what should I have in my home bar? I would certainly say original Pinot Noir cask, stout cask, and cask strength.
Right. Right. Those are the core. Right. I love it. So with respect to the Pinot, which is the next one on our list here,
Mhm.
where do you get your wine casks from? I mean, obviously there's a lot of wine, in your neck of the woods, so, and also even in just a little south of you, obviously, in California. What is your source for your wine casks?
Yeah, for this expression we're tasting now, it's 100% Oregon wine. And, if for those who have been to
Oh,
Portland and have driven south, I mean, within 40 minutes, you're in wine country. And so some of the world's best Pinot Noir is grown and, turned into wine in that region. It has a very strong cultural and technical relationship with Burgundy. And so we're just up the road from some of the best wine in the world. And over the years, we've made a lot of friends in that part of Oregon and in that industry. And, we enjoy sharing bottles with each other. And so when we first thought of finishing Westward in Pinot Noir casks, or I guess in wine casks in general, we have applied the same logic that led us to malted barley, which is, if we're going to have a wine finished whiskey in Oregon, what's the wine that it needs to be finished in? And to us, the obvious place to
Pinot.
go was Pinot Noir.
Okay, so does this start off in the same, same barrels essentially as the original, and then do you finish it are you essentially taking the original and then finishing it in the Pinot cask? Is that what you're doing?
That's exactly right. So this is whiskey that has lived in 2 different casks. First, New American Oak and the way we described when we tasted original,
Mhm.
and then we'll put that into a French oak Pinot Noir cask that came from a winery in the Willamette Valley, and that usually takes no more than 12 months and sometimes even less to really give us the character and the flavor and even the color that we're looking for. And specifically, so what we're tasting today was mostly finished in casks from Bergstrom. So one of our favorite wineries in the Willamette Valley and one of the pioneers of wine production in Oregon. But we work with maybe a dozen or so producers of various sizes, and as Westward has grown and as our Pinot Noir finish has grown, more and more we apply the same logic of our original, which is to bring together a few different casks from a few different producers. We don't market the name of the wine producer on the label, but
Sure,
again,
sure.
we're always happy to talk about who they are.
Right.
But
Well, that's typical. I mean, most, wine finished whiskeys, you'll see on there, you'll see Ruby Port or Tawny Port or Pedro Jimenez, or Oloroso. You don't know exactly where it came from, and that's fine. But one question that I do have, and that actually several people have here. So let's talk about the length of time. So how, after it is essentially the original, then you essentially take that. How long does it spend in the Pinot casks?
yeah, so we want Westward to be fully mature before it ever goes into a secondary finish. So the
Okay.
secondary finish is not, finishing school. It's already all grown up and ready to be original if it wanted.
Nice.
We just want to give it that additional layer of flavor. And so let's say again, on average, call it 5 to 6 year old whiskey goes into a Pinot Noir cask for on average about a year, plus minus a few months.
This is this is like a really good Highland Scotch aged in a wine cask. This is delicious stuff. This is
Yeah,
really
and
good.
keep in mind that, I mean, we're literally just up the road. We can
Right.
go to the winery for lunch and come back with a barrel. So these are as fresh as barrels can be when we fill them. And that's crucial because you lose a lot when you ship something, over the course of
Oh,
days or
sure.
hundreds or thousands of miles. These literally came from the winery this morning and we can fill them this afternoon.
Oh, that's a great advantage that you have. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. Um, I'm loving this stuff. People are giving it great comments, very fruit forward. People are fans of Willamette Valley, the wines there. This is delicious stuff. This is great stuff. So, and so this is something that will always be produced by your company. This is something that you would consider to be, something that'll be on a regular basis for you.
Yeah, this is definitely part of that kind of core of what we think defines Westward. But I mean, if you'll indulge me a story, it'll say a lot
Sure.
about how these things come to be because, we don't, I mean, I was going to say, I wish there was a burning bush and next to it, there are the instructions to our next expression, but that would actually be bad because distilleries shouldn't have fires. So the whole burning bush thing doesn't work well. So instead, what we do is we rely a lot on feedback from our club members, feedback from people who visit us, but also feedback from our friends in the trade. And so the story of our Pinot Noir finish, as Oregon as the product is, it really began with the Whiskey Club Australia, which is the largest whiskey club in the world, wanting to have a Westward release to offer to their guests in Australia. And they wanted it to be something that had never been done anywhere, and something that really spoke to the place Westward comes from.
Wow.
And so we thought this would be a really interesting way to go. And we partnered with a couple of wineries who we'd known personally. And so for a year, this was an exclusive in Australia. It turned out to be a very successful release for them. It has done well in Australia, and so then we finally launched it in the US.
Oh, wow, that's great. I love it. And by the way, one of the questions we had here is, do you do anything to the wine barrels before you put the whiskey in them? I know, like for instance, like Starward, a lot of times they're using like wet barrels. It's like some people they dry them out. Are you doing anything to those barrels before you put your whiskey into them?
Yeah, generally no. I mean, they are technically wet barrels because they just got dumped at the winery and we drove them up and filled them. So there's a lot of wine in the wood, but we're not putting wine back in or conditioning them in any way.
Okay.
There's just a lot of wine in the wood from years of use at the wineries we partner with.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I've actually been in a distillery where there's so many barrels and old barrels there that they actually fill them with a bunch of cheap wine just to keep the barrels moist, and keep them alive, so to speak.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so that's the reason you want to be an hour drive away from
right.
world-class wineries you partner with.
Right, you
So
have that
that
advantage. Yeah,
all
that's a
goes away.
wonderful advantage. No, I love that. So the next one, so this one's different. Rum cask. Okay. Now obviously you can make rum anywhere. You can make it from cane sugar and all that stuff. Where are these rum casks coming from?
Yeah, this is, I mean, again, in keeping of, with everything Westward is in some form the story of us. This one is more related to the story of me. So I grew up in Guatemala, and
In
having
where? I'm sorry, where?
Guatemala.
Oh, okay.
And so having grown up there, my kind of oldest, closest friend and his family are sugar producers, and they have a sugar mill. And they years ago, and they're actually our partners in Westward, so they were our first investor. And so these are like people I've known my whole life, right? And so they really fell in love with the philosophy of how we make Westward and how different that is from, let's say, industrial whiskey production. And they wanted to do that for rum, not in the, yeah, let's go take over the rum world kind of way, but more like this sounds like a great way to tell the story of our family in Guatemala through unique, outstanding quality rum made the Westward way. And
But
so
but this
years
one is
ago,
but this one is a higher ABV though too, because your other expressions have been, that we've had 45, 43, 46. This one's 50, so not only are you using casks that you don't usually use, but you also have a higher ABV. Can you tell us how that came about?
yeah. So let me just give me 30 seconds and I'll
Yeah,
finish
sure.
the story
Take
of
two
how we
minutes.
got
It's
there, and
fine.
then I
Take your
will
time.
answer it. But anyway, so the upshot is we went to Guatemala and made rum. We shipped it up to Portland where we filled barrels with it to age it there. And that's like for an entirely different tasting of why Guatemalan rules are the way they are. But it had to be aged by us in Oregon. And so we're sitting on all these
Mhm.
hundreds of barrels of really amazing Guatemalan rum that we made in Guatemala. And we thought it'd be fun as we bottled it to use those kind of Magdalena rum, what's the brand,
Okay.
casks to finish Westward, and so we did
Hmm.
that. And so the choice of the kind of 50 ABV or 100 proof is we just go through this with anything new and we taste it at different groups, and sometimes we guess right from the start and sometimes we're surprised that something actually works better at a slightly higher or slightly lower proof. This we turned out to like best at 100 proof, and so that's what we went with.
Well, this is you're getting good comments here. People are really enjoying this. People are saying spicy and sweet, with a little bit of heat on the back end, which is
Yeah,
nice. And
right.
and actually,
I see I see a comment from someone named Quetzal, which is as Guatemalan a name as there can be, about Guatemalan rum. So yes, yeah, Magdalena, because the point was about Zacapa, which is probably the best known Guatemalan rum. Magdalena is at the other end of the spectrum. It's not a dark rum. It's not a kind of caramel color. It's a light. It's the best rum in the world, I think, to make a daiquiri. But again, thanks.
again,
Don't sue me.
no, we're
It's good.
enjoying this. This is really, really good. This is lovely. But of course, in this case, you have to bring those casks. So obviously, this isn't a case where you're using casks that are right in your backyard.
I mean, in the end, they were because we had to ship bulk rum from Guatemala to Oregon to then fill casks there and age it.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so the Magdalena rum barrels are literally right next to Westward barrels in the same barrel warehouse.
Oh, wonderful. Wow.
So this was pretty, once we'd gone through the whole, like, is it weird that we got on planes and went to Guatemala and made rum and all that? Yes, that's surprising, but the last part of this was pretty obvious, which was like, oh, I wonder what would happen if we finish Westward in these rum casks.
You know, it's funny. We've heard of so many different crazy things that people do. I mean, well, what is that? Jefferson's Ocean, they put the casks on a ship or something like that for a while, and M&H Dead Sea, they put something on a roof near the Dead Sea for a while. I mean, people do weird things to make good whiskey. So, there's no judgment here if the end product is good.
Yeah. By the way, there's a question on how the rum itself is aged, since that becomes part of this. So we use bourbon and Tennessee whiskey use casks to age Magdalena, and so those become that
Ah,
secondary barrel for Westward rum cask.
very nice. Very, very nice. No, this is good. This is really, really good. I'm loving it. And so how long is it in those rum casks? Is it the same thing where it's a whiskey that's already in your mind complete, and then
Exactly.
you're just giving it a little bit of a taste of the rum? Is that kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And typically, again, 12 months, give or take.
Okay. So it's actually but this is not a third fill. This is really a second fill. This goes from your original
Correct.
barrels then into the rum barrels.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So on this side of the room, we have Westward original aging in new casks, and on the other side of the room, we have Magdalena aging in used bourbon casks, and then we take mature Westward and put it in those now rum. I guess for the rum barrels, for those barrels that we got from bourbon producers, it's their third time around because they made bourbon, then they made Magdalena rum, then
Those barrels. Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying. But the whiskey isn't in three barrels.
the whiskey's
It's
been in two barrels. Yeah.
right. It's two. Right. I see that family tree of how that ends up. That flow chart of where you end up. But by the way, how many states currently carry Westward bottles
We're
in the United States?
in one form or another in 27 states. And then, I mean, we would always prefer anybody to go to their local shop to find us. But if that isn't an option, then our online store ships to 73% of the country
Oh,
on a
nice.
population basis. So there are just some states where we're not allowed to ship, but most people in most places, if their local store doesn't have us and won't bring us in, then that's always an option.
Okay. So this next one, I have to tell you something interesting is that whenever I was telling people that our next tasting is going to be Westward, several people immediately said, "Ooh, I love their stout cask." Okay. I mean, that just jumped out that I love their stout cask. And that's one of the reasons why, when I proposed this lineup to you, which you agreed to, the order that I wanted this to be towards the end, and because it also has a very, strong flavor to it. Tell us about this. Tell us how this came about. Tell us about the stout casks themselves, where the stout comes from. Right. Take it away, and everybody enjoy the stout cask.
Yeah, cheers. This is as Oregon as it gets, but it's a great kind of story of innovation. So, just like Oregon is known around the world for world-class Pinot Noir, uh, we're also one of the world's great brewing regions, right? Both for innovation and just quality. It's a great beer culture, and Westward, in a lot of ways, us are a beer culture. Like almost everybody who in any way is involved in making Westward, we'll usually say was a brewer, but in fact, since we make whiskey from American Pale Ale, everybody at Westward is a brewer. That's the first thing we do when we make whiskey is we brew really great American Pale Ales. So it's in the DNA of the product. It's in our culture. It's something we love. And so Miles, my colleague, who's our master blender, who some of you have probably met, came to Westward, more than 10 years ago from a small brewery in Oregon called Migration that makes really great beer. And one of my favorite things they make is a once a year release of an imperial stout called Frankie. And so they finished their imperial stout in whiskey barrels, and they would usually go to a broker and get whiskey barrels and do that. But since Miles had just come to Westward from Migration, we agreed to send a couple of barrels for them to finish their Frankie for that season. And we figured at the very least we'll get invited to the release party and that'll be fun. And that made it worth it. But it turned out to have, a lot more longevity. So, um, so that, that beer turned out really well. We brought the barrels back to Westward. Again, these guys are just down the road. So this is, literally local. And we decided to put mature Westward Original in these barrels that had been Westward Original barrels. They,
Okay,
that's,
so let me make sure I get this. You
yeah,
made
yeah,
original, you made original, you take the original casks, you give them to a brewery puts stout in them, okay? How long is the stout in those barrels? Not that long,
less than a year. Yeah.
okay? And
Months.
then you take those barrels back
Correct.
and then you put original back into those.
Yeah, exactly. So now these
Love it.
barrels are, they used to be ours and, gave Westward character to that stout somebody else made. Then the barrels come back with lots and lots of stout flavor and character, and we put mature Westward in there and, put all of that together. And so the first time we did this, I mean, we weren't really sure, right? One of the best things you can have as a whiskey maker, if you're trying to be innovative, is a tasting room, because it's a place where you can just put something out there and people will tell you, right? I mean, we've made some things that didn't turn out the way we thought, and that's okay. But this was just such a clear winner immediately, right?
Yeah.
People loved it and wanted more of it, and but it's such a convoluted process that, it was immediately too late to have enough for the year we launched it.
Okay.
But that set in motion, us deciding that every used Westward barrel, when we bottled original, since it could never again be used for original because it's no
Right.
longer new, we would find a home for it at a brewery. And then, we've essentially been managing an inventory of barrels outside of the distillery that live
Did
in.
you have barcodes on the barrels to keep track of them? Because I know that some distilleries do the barcode system for keeping track of what the barrels have done.
Yeah, no, we don't.
Okay.
But so we've now, expanded to more than 20 different breweries. We started working, I mean, originally all in Oregon. Migration is still one of our partners. The very first barrel we sent to Migration when this whole thing started, we're still trading back and forth. So the barrel lives on. But now we work with, as small as them, as large as Deschutes,
Yeah.
and then we've
This is
started working. We did something with Old Rasputin in California this year where they just released.
Eric Lee just giving you the thumbs up on Old Rasputin.
Yeah, I feel the same way. So they released an edition of Old Rasputin, finished in Westward casks. We got those barrels back, and next year there will be Westward finished in Old Rasputin, stout.
And will it also be stout? Is it are these all they're all stout because this is the consistency for
Yeah,
stout.
generally, yeah, there are some
Okay.
exceptions here and there, but in general, that's what we're doing.
Okay. Well, we're getting some great comments that that very long finish on this, great nose,
Yeah.
chocolate, cherries, cinnamon, things like that. Yeah,
Yeah, and I
this is
see
great.
a comment on Deschutes Abyss. A lot of the barrels that make Abyss are Westward barrels. Like Deschutes is our biggest partner by far.
And Ketzel's giving you the thumbs up again there. So very, 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 very good. Excellent. So then this last one is essentially a cast strength version of the original, right?
Yeah, and I guess it's one of those things that in hindsight it seems really obvious, and maybe we should have done this from the start, um, but I mean, you never know.
Right.
And so in this case, I think the inspiration was really like, in fact, I'm going to use this moment to say, we would love it if you would come visit us. And so, while we may not be on the way to wherever your next trip is, we're a really great place to visit because it's all about candor and transparency and, get up close to everything and see it. And so one of everybody's favorite experiences when they visit us is to come out to our barrel warehouse and then just walk around and taste, really delicious whiskey out of the barrel.
Yeah.
And so obviously, one of the main differences between tasting whiskey and Clackamas out of the barrel and tasting it out of an original Westward bottle is the proof. And I mean, again, for obvious reasons, this is the most Westward flavored Westward there is, because it hasn't been cut to a proof for any for any reason other than what we're going for is that kind of unfettered, uncut, this is Westward kind of flavor. And so this is the one that turned out to be named by Whiskey Advocate as one of the 5 best whiskeys in the world a year ago, which was really great for us. And I'll admit, I mean, this was probably a kind of tasting room special until the Whiskey Advocate ranking came out, and then it became almost 20% of our sales.
Well, it's delicious. It's absolutely delicious, and for that proof, it's not as hot as you would expect.
Yeah, and I mean that goes back to, again, kind of the story of us and that American pale ale philosophy to the beer that we distill. I've tried to be less geeky than we sometimes can be, but
wait until the questions come, okay?
yeah, but I mean the flavor, without a doubt, what makes Westward special from a flavor standpoint happens when we brew it, right? The rest of it, we're concentrating flavor and giving it character, but every single flavor we want in Westward comes from a slow, low temperature fermentation with ale yeast, which is completely different from almost any whiskey production anywhere. And it takes a lot of time, and it's more expensive. But it leads years later to 125 proof whiskey that is really drinkable, because it doesn't have any kind of off flavors or anything that would be there if we'd rushed through the fermentation, or if we'd used distiller's yeast, or if we'd done any number of other things up front. It really goes back to the beginning, which is our number one reason for not wanting to talk about age statements, because age statements are a head fake that causes people to not ask enough questions about how something was really made. And we love to talk about how things are really made.
Well, I got to say, the results speak for themselves, because I've never had a bottle of Westland that I didn't like. Okay, it's always great stuff. I always enjoy it. I always end up finishing the Westward bottle, and then I have to go get a new one, which is obviously a wonderful thing for you guys. But I love the range. Okay, I love the fact that you have different kinds, and that a few of them will be out every year, but then you're experimenting still with other things. And I love that you have the single barrels. Matter of fact, here in Chicago at Binny's, many of us, we love to go look at the Binny's end of bin sale. And the end of bin doesn't mean that it's not good. It means that the public doesn't know what it is. Okay, that's what you have on end of bin. And those of us who know what we're doing can find some great deals on the end of bin. And a lot of times, unfortunately for your specific industry, a lot of times those are American single malts. Okay, because the general public still doesn't know a lot about them. And I have gotten some great American single malts off of that end of bin sale, including some Westwards. And it's a shame, but I got to tell you, you've got some great stuff here. What we're going to do is we're going to open it up to questions now, because we've gone through the 6 expressions. Eric, do you have Eric's going to ask a question or two, and then while Eric's asking his question, I want to remind everybody in the reactions tab, please raise your hands, okay, so that we can come to you and ask, and get to your questions. Eric, if you can please ask your question, please.
Sure. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Thomas for talking, and Jared also for adding a lot of color commentary in the chat while the questions were going on. Definitely the stout is definitely one of my favorites. At World Whiskey, I had tried this stout, and then I had gone a couple tables over to an Australian whiskey also ending in Ward that also had a stout expression, and this was hands down so much better. So I very much enjoyed it. One question I had on when you're finishing your expressions, are you pouring them just from one barrel in and filling up another barrel, or are you vatting them together and then, you know, letting them sit for a bit and then pouring them into a secondary finishing?
So for practical purposes, more often than not, it'll be the vatting approach. I wouldn't say, I think it'd be an interesting thought experiment that I will thank you for and take you up on by discussing it with my colleagues of like what effect that has other than it's practical to collect the whiskey from, you know, these barrels before putting it into those barrels. It definitely, you know, it helps with the process of letting the more volatile compounds evaporate away. And, you know, part of aging is what goes into whiskey over time, but part of it is what evaporates away. So just that process of dumping barrels and vatting and then filling new ones, you know, contributes to that process. But I won't attempt to give you a more technical answer than that, other than from a process standpoint, that's what we're doing. Although typically, I mean, we're dealing with fairly small quantities, right? We're filling, you know, barrels, not even dozens at a time, but you know, sometimes like 5, 10, 20 at a time.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Beautiful. Eric, any other questions for you?
No, that's it for now.
Okay, Ariel Tesher, I see you on your patio, your upstairs patio on your deck. It looks lovely.
It's a beautiful
Please
day.
unmute. Please unmute and ask your question.
So you described, you know, starting off by making an APA for generally for your whiskeys, and I've read a bit about some people liking, some people not, about whether you add hops to the wort before making whiskey or not. Is that something you guys end up doing? Because
We
I
do not.
taste. You don't. Okay,
No,
so it
we
must be the
don't.
power of
And
suggestion. Because I'm tasting a lot of hoppiness, and I was
yeah,
wondering if that's where I'm getting it.
yeah, I'm not surprised that you're getting that. But no, we do not put hops into our beer. That would be, again, when you come visit us, because I'm counting on everybody to come. You know, one of the cool things at the distillery is to taste the beer. Like, you can taste the beer of the day we made it. You can taste it 5 days later when it's about to go into the stills. It's interesting to see how it evolves. And so it's an ale in every way that's recognizable, except for the hops. But there is flavor in there that again goes back to using Chico ale yeast and how we ferment and doing it the way we do. And like I've had a couple of funny meetings with Total Wine, like especially years ago when Allison Scherer was still the buyer there, and like she would swear that we were putting cannabis in the whiskey because how can it possibly taste like this?
Right, it has the hops flavor. Yeah.
And you know, we assured her that we're not, because jail, federal prison's a really bad place to be for good whiskey. And but it does something about, you know, that yeast and that slow, low temperature fermentation um, causes that flavor note to be there, you know, years later.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. Great question. Thank you, Thomas. Great response. Michael Nolan, please unmute.
Thomas, first off, thank you very much for this evening. It was a great lineup, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Really, what I'd like you to do is maybe talk a little bit. You just mentioned it, coming out and visiting. Tell us a little bit about what the experience is like visiting the distillery.
Yeah, thank you for helping me market this.
Well, I've got. That leads into something else, but go ahead.
Deal. Yeah, so we, you know, what we do takes place, I would say, in 3 different places. So we're gonna visualize your visit. So you arrive in Portland. That's probably the easiest place to be. We have our distillery right in the center of the city, so kind of walking distance from, you know, most of the hotels, and just have a city distillery, right? Easy to get to. And so what happens at the distillery is everything related to brewing and distilling. So malt comes in, we brew, we distill, we fill barrels. but we don't keep any barrels there. So there's a second place in Clackamas, which is about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on traffic, away from the distillery outside of the city. We keep all of our barrels there. I'd say a good visit involves going to both because there are interesting things that happen in each one. And then, on your way out of town, we were the first airport distillery tasting room in the world. So we've got a full-on tasting room on one side of the airport and a kiosk on the other. So you can fondly think back to your favorite bottles and pick up a couple to take home with you.
Oh,
That sounded like an ad.
I'm asking this question purely because my wife and myself love visiting distilleries, and we just happened to be visiting Portland in July. So
I would take it as a personal offense if you didn't come.
Okay.
Okay, well-
Michael, let's make sure that we contact each other after this. I will put you in direct contact.
yeah, I talk to you all the
Jared and
time, Gil.
Thomas.
I'll hit you up and
Yeah, I mean, I'll just make sure, we'll just make sure it happens.
Yeah.
Thomas, this will definitely happen. And yeah, you guys will have a blast. Yeah, I
And
can't
I
wait.
just-
Yeah, I
I
can't
think-
wait to see the pictures. The pictures are gonna be great.
there's a price involved in it for me though. I'll have to bring him back a bottle. So
That's okay. We're all generous with each other. It's all good, Michael.
Yeah, no, it's
yeah.
a great place to visit to get a really upfront look at how
Great.
things are made.
Wonderful. Michael, do you have any other questions, or should we go on to the next person?
real quick, the Pinot cast, which I actually particularly enjoyed this evening. Have you ever bottled it at a higher ABV?
We have. We've done a few single barrel bottlings of Pinot at cask strength, and those turn out really nicely. Those our single barrel business really depends more on what a store or a bar or a restaurant want to have. So we tend to work with them on what they think resonates with their audience. So we don't bottle it first and then go look for a buyer. It's more people come to visit, taste through things, and fall in love with something, and that becomes their barrel.
Yeah,
Got it.
Execs out of California, I think, did bottled one, which a number of people raved to me about. Of course, you can't find it, but
That's great. All right. Thank you, Michael. Michael Bloom, please unmute.
It's the world of the Michaels. There's a couple of us here. Actually, that's part of my question, and it's another inviting you to advertise more of what you do. But I'm going to ask you a yes or no question first, or you can answer more than that. But you mentioned how your barrels are used for beer, and then you get them back. Do people are whiskey barrel finishing wine too? Do some of your barrels end up doing that these days?
We don't have any examples of that. And again, I'm not a winemaker. I love wine, but I'm not a winemaker. But what our friends who make wine tell us is that American white oak is too aggressive for what they're trying to do with wine, and that it just isn't a great fit. So basically it's not you, it's me, but no.
So better for beer than wine. There was an evening where we had 5 Michaels tasting wonderful whiskey in the last Michael's backyard, and one of the things that we got to try were a couple bottles of Westward from your whiskey club. I wanted to give you the chance to talk about your whiskey club, because I think even though we're nowhere near Oregon, some of us might be able to benefit from that.
Yeah, no, I would speculate that almost everybody with us today, sorry, Tennessee, lives in a place where we can ship. And so the club's been a fantastic experience. And I think one of the smartest things we ever did by accident, that just made us look smart in hindsight. But we created this club maybe like 6 years ago, to solve a problem that is different from any problem we have now, which was that we love to innovate and we love to do things where we're not really sure what's going to happen. So we can't make a lot of it because it might go horribly wrong, and we can't afford that. And so we found ourselves in possession of dozens of instances of 1 barrel or 2 barrels of something that turned out really, really well. And so when you have 1 barrel or 2 barrels of something really good, it's not really going to work in wholesale. because there just isn't enough of it to really make it a sustainable business that, you know, a store would want to get into. And so we needed an outlet for that. And so we thought, well, you know, if we create a club and, you know, offer these unique things that are never going to go into distribution, then maybe you know, maybe somebody will show up, right? So I became the first member of our club, and the husband of our publicist became the second member, and then we had no idea what was going to happen. But today we, you know, it's grown to a few thousand members, and it has kind of flipped things around, because now the thing is like because whiskey takes a long time to arrive at a final answer for, you know, we're now making things this year to release to our club in, you know, 2030 or beyond. And
Wow, that's
so
incredible.
it's really flipped around how we think of it, because we're no longer in a place of, you know, well, geez, how are we going to get rid of this one or two really delicious barrels? It's very intentional, and it's also kind of the greatest community one can imagine, right? These are people who really appreciate what we do, but we also get to know each other well enough that they'll give us feedback that isn't always, you know, they'll tell us when they think we did something that doesn't make any sense. And those are the friends you need, right? The ones who can tell you like, you don't do that again. And so it's fantastic. And so if I have any regret, the only regret, it's that we called it a club, because it sounds pretentious and like something that you need to pay to join. And in fact, what it really is a, a list that you can choose to put your name on, that gives you an opportunity to buy something every quarter that will never go into distribution and that you'll never see again. And if you want it this quarter, you can have it. And if you don't, you can skip and not take it, and you're fine. So it really is more like an opportunity to see really interesting things that are never coming to the store down the street.
Kessel wants to know if you ship to North Carolina. Is that one of the states that you ship to?
Yes, our fulfillment partner ships to North Carolina. We're not 100% sure how they can do that, but
You don't ask.
but we thank the good Lord that they can, and they do.
Wonderful. Very good. Bloom, does that answer all your questions? Yes, it does. Daniel Pikus, unmute, please.
Dale, do you mind if I chime
Oh.
in there just real quick?
Sure, Jared. Yeah, sure.
I was also just going to mention, just to everyone, I dropped the link in the chat if anyone wants to join. It is free to join. There's no obligation. To give you an idea of some of the cool stuff, like I've got a few bottles at home. Like there's for example, like a cognac finish one, which is one of my personal favorites. There's also one that mixes malted rye and malted barley. There's one that's inspired, essentially like a collaboration with Ken's artisanal sourdough, which is like very famous in the Pacific Northwest, that they created an expression that's very much inspired by that. That's just got these really good, great, like funky notes to it. But it gives you like a lot of great access to cool expressions that there's no obligation to get, but you can only get it if you're part of the club.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Or if we know where you live, right, Jared?
Sure.
Yeah, it's cheaper that way, but
cheaper that way. Not far from Eric. Let's all remember.
I was
that.
gonna say
Not
I'll be
far.
over in 10 minutes.
That's it.
thank you, Jared. You're better at this than me.
Very good. Thank you for chiming in, Jared. We appreciate it. Daniel Pikus, please unmute and ask your question.
As one of the founding members of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, can you talk a little bit about the TTB process of defining American Single Malt, where they are in that process, and how you feel about the rules that they laid down?
Yeah, the last part of your question is the easiest, because the standard of identity that TTB will either approve or not. I mean, we literally wrote like in a joint effort with the American Craft Spirits Association. So it was, you know, the consensus opinion of a lot of us who have been doing this for a long time. It left a lot of room for people to innovate and do their own thing. It's just some really fundamental things like 100% malted barley made in the United States, There's some guidance around up to what proof it can be distilled at, 160, down to what proof it can be bottled at, 80. So just a few technicalities, and the point is to protect consumers, from someone using the term single malt and it having no meaning, right? So it's expensive to use barley, right? And it's expensive to do things the way we do it. And so it provides some protection in the form of, anybody who's willing to go through that effort and that investment gets to call it American single malt on their label. Having said that, and mine is a minority opinion in the community of American single malt distillers, I don't think TTB approving a standard of identity is going to do anything, because like I've loved whiskey my whole life, but I only found out what TTB was when I owned a distillery. And so the fact that a regulatory agency decides something is a thing in no way causes a consumer to think it's a thing. And so I think the future of American single malt really depends on each of us individually doing a great job with our products, doing a great job of telling a compelling story, of consumers who love whiskey deciding to have relationships with brands like Westward. And if enough of us do that and do it well, like then you have a category that has consumer relevance. Until then, you have a paragraph in the CFR that only we know how to find.
Daniel, does that answer your question?
We haven't heard any updates from the TTP after the comment period, so I don't know if you had any more,
No,
insight into where they are with things.
There has been silence for a considerable amount of time, and I anything I say would be pure speculation on why it's taken so long. I know, I guess the one thing I know firsthand, I was at a whiskey tasting at the American Embassy in London about a year ago, and I had an opportunity to speak with a couple of people from the Scotch Whisky Association who were displeased by the absence of a minimum age standard in our standard of identity. Now, whether that really can turn into TTB not doing something or not, I'm not sure, but at least somebody is lobbying against some part of what we proposed. We're always happy to revisit language. I think it's just good to have clarity around what something is when you see a name on the label.
Well, also, but one other thing about that you mentioned there about the age, America's huge, and is it really fair for the standards or the definitions to be the same for Waco, Texas, for balcones, or Del Bac, or Colkegan, and for you, because you're in such different climate areas. So I understand why some people want to have that age statement on there, but I don't think it would necessarily be fair. It wouldn't necessarily be fair for those places who
No, I mean,
age in hot areas.
Yeah, I agree, and I think
Yeah.
from a quality standpoint, yours is an excellent argument. I would give you an economic / conspiracy one, which is, for centuries, large distillers have used minimum age requirements as a moat they build around their business to make it expensive for anybody to come in and compete against them.
Right.
And so you as a consumer can decide whether you want something that's 3 years old, 4 years old, or 20 years old. You don't need TB to decide for you.
Exactly. Exactly. Daniel, do you have any follow-up questions, or are we good
That's
for
good.
now?
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So let's go on to Josh Eisenberg. Josh, please unmute.
Sorry.
No worries.
Fantastic night. Thanks. I live in Ohio, so I am sad that Ohio has decided not to carry Westward Stout casks. So I'll be ordering, or Westward Stout casks. So I'll be ordering that from your online store. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
My question is about just more detail about the barley itself, right? Like, again, you've developed a relationship with this farm. Has anything changed or evolved around the type of barley that you're using, or anything that they're doing special for you? That just seems like a very special relationship there. So wanted to know more about that.
Yeah, I will elaborate on that, and then sort of talk about barley varietals, which is fun. They all have cool names. So our direct partner is a malting. So they would be the people who buy barley from farms, bring it in and malt it and prepare it for our use. And Great Western Malting right near us is kind of our main partner for that. They buy from thousands of farms, big and small, in around the Northwest. And so, yes, historically, there are very specific barley varietals that are used for different things. The barley that became the malt that we were using at the time we distilled most of what we've tried tonight, long sentence, was a varietal called, or is a varietal called Full Pint. It is not what we're using today. Today we're using one called the Odyssey. But there's, for all the reasons we've discussed, there's a lapse of several years from the barley we're using today to what's in the bottle that you're enjoying, 6 to 8 years from now. These varieties are, there's, just like the wine industry has UC Davis, the beer and malt whiskey world has Oregon State University, and so there's just an amazing amount of research that goes into developing barley varietals that are uniquely suited, not just to the climate of the Northwest, but to what producers like us are looking for in their final products.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Wonderful. All right. So it looks like we're finished with all the questions. And I estimated our time pretty accurately here. I thought we'd be done at about 8:15, and it's pretty close. I want to remind everybody that after we adjourn, we will have an after party. So please hang out. Before we do that, Jared, you've been pretty quiet for most of this, although you did come in a little bit. Jared, do you have any comments or questions before we turn it over to Thomas for any last words?
The only thing I noticed is that Josh had actually asked a question in the chat earlier, but I don't know that necessarily got addressed, that I didn't know the answer for, so I was just kind of holding off on it. Thomas, do you happen to know, especially for the Pinot Noir, what zone that most of the barrels are sourced from? Because I know the Willamette Valley is broken up to, I don't know exactly, I think it's about 10 to 12 different zones. Is there a specific one that the Pinot Noir is sourced from?
There isn't a specific one, because we work with a few different wineries who are in different areas. So Carlton and Ribbon Ridge, and I think maybe Bergstrom is Ribbon Ridge. But anyway, it's a fairly small area, but there are some important terroir differences, from one part to the other. But because we work with several different wineries, we span different ABAs.
Great, thank you. Actually,
Cool.
Josh, so let's see here. So that's good, great. Thank you, Jared, for bringing that up. And yeah, because we've been getting a lot of different questions and comments. We've been addressing most of them. By the way, Thomas, I want to read to you a comment that I got from somebody here. One of my friends on here, Paul, who's a big wine guy. Paul actually sent me a private message that I don't have a question. I'm just blown away by this Pinot cask. Close my eyes and it's Pinot on the nose, just incredible. So you're getting it from both the wine people and the and then the whiskey people here, which is just great. Josh, did you just raise your hand again? Josh Eisenberg?
No, I was just clapping.
Okay, that was clapping. I couldn't tell that was going. Hey, what is the sound?
Also a wine guy. Totally agree.
What is the sound of one hand clapping on Zoom? I have no idea. Thomas, any last words before we wrap this up here?
Yeah, I'm grateful to you for your time and having chosen to be here, and I hope you tasted one or more things that you'd love to have at home or share with a friend or both. And at the same time, I'll encourage each of you to find the distilleries close to you and support them as well, because this is like, it has never been a more difficult time in this industry than it is right now. And a lot of businesses that you may have heard, I don't take anybody being around a year from now for granted. Small businesses need the support of people who love what they do. And again, and I mean, I
Yeah,
hope
I
hope
hear
you'll
that. I
support
agree with
us,
you.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a
but
good message.
But there's so many good people doing so many great things in this industry, and we all want to support them, and I invite you to do the same.
No, I appreciate that. And we actually do like to go to visits of local distilleries. And actually tomorrow night, I'm pouring Illinois bourbons at a local Chamber of Commerce event. Just to give some love to the local distilleries and all that stuff. What I like everybody to do right now before we adjourn, I would like everybody, if you are so inclined, to put to put some whiskey in a glass or go back to one of the glasses you haven't finished yet. I'm going back to the Pinot. I've already finished the stout and the Milestone. I'd like everybody, please unmute. Everybody, please unmute. And everybody, let's see, everybody unmute. Come on, unmute everybody. And I'd like everybody to please join me in saying cheers and thank you to our special guests, Jared and Thomas. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
This was great.
Slanjava.
This was wonderful. We had a great time. And everybody, please stay around for the after party.